So, you decide to give a ball a good kick across the floor. It goes flying. But here's the cool part. For those few seconds it's soaring through the air, you're not just witnessing the usual 3-dimension of height, width, and depth. But there's another dimension in play. Time. Now, I know what you're thinking. How on earth can we see time? Well, we can't exactly see time itself, but we can observe its effects. And what better way to do that than by watching the ball's movements? As it travels through space, we get a glimpse of that progression of time. It's like a sneak peek into the 4th dimension. But when we dive into discussions about spacetime, we often throw in an extra dimension, the 5th one. Think of it as a micro-dimension, not as obvious as the other 4. You won't spot it just by kicking a ball around. In the epic movie Interstellar, there's this whole thing about these 5th dimension beings secretly helping out the main characters. These beings are from another realm or something, and they hook them up with a sweet spaceship and a super convenient wormhole for intergalactic travel. At the end of the film, they go through a black hole and end up in this crazy library of infinite knowledge. And those mysterious beings are actually McConaughey himself. Before we get too deep, let's start with the building blocks of everything in this universe. Point. Yep, that tiny little dot holds the key to it all. Let's label it as 0 dimension. Dimension number 1 is just a line, a super skinny line stretching from point A to point B, like a tightrope walker defying gravity. It's like a ghostly concept that we can understand, but in reality, our world is all about things we can touch and see. Even the tiniest stuff around us has some length and width, unlike this elusive line. Dimension number 2 is a plane. When you take a line and give it some width, you got yourself a plane. It's like a flat surface that you can view head-on. Think floors, ceilings, tabletops, TV screens, and movie screens. As easy as it is to imagine a plane, it just can't quite exist in our reality. Yep, even sheets of paper have some depth to them. However, you've seen the 2nd dimension if you've ever watched any pre-internet cartoon. Typically, all the vintage cartoons out there are 2-dimensional. Now, welcome dimension number 3, which is space. It's the one we call our own. When you add a little something to a line, it magically transforms into a plane. And guess what? When you blow it up from a different angle, that plane becomes an object in our super cool world. We're all about length, width, and depth here. They're totally our jam. Time is dimension number 4. Close your eyes and imagine yourself right now, in this very moment. Now picture yourself 2 minutes ago. Or how about 2 days ago? Wait, let's take it up a notch. 2 years ago. And what about 2 centuries ago? Now here's where things get funky. Imagine all these versions of yourself from different points in time, connected along a timeline. It's like you're physically linked to each of these variations of yourself. It may sound complicated, but in reality, the jump from the 3rd dimension to the 4th dimension is just like the previous jumps we've made. Imagine you're looking at a line. If you change your perspective a bit, that line becomes a whole plane. It's like a revelation that the super skinny line you saw before was just one part of a bigger physical object, its length to be exact. Now let's take it a step further. When you shift your gaze from the plane to an everyday object or even a person, that plane becomes like a frozen snapshot of that thing. It's just one side of it, without any depth or perspective. But if you physically turn around and look at that single face, you're entering Dimension 3. If you repeat this process once again, you'll find yourself in Dimension 4. Now you're not just looking at an object from its 3 special dimensions, but you're seeing it as one face of a timeline. It's like realizing that any object we know is just one part of a whole timeline. If you could step outside of time and zip across that timeline, you'd witness all the different versions of that object, its past, present, and future. Like flipping through a crazy flipbook. It's like having all those individual frames strung together forever in both directions. And what about dimension number 5? This is where we find McConaughey in that bookcase scene. Get ready to leave the 4th dimension behind and dive into a world of endless possibilities. You see, those physical manifestations we witness are just one side of the story. They represent the realm of possibility. Now imagine a timeline as a bunch of possibilities stemming from a single moment. Let's use your birth as an example. Each moment in your life is like a face on a never-ending you from the fourth dimension's perspective. Now picture this timeline as just one face on a crazy object made up of countless other timelines. Each line represents all the different moments and faces that could have happened after your birth. It's like the fifth dimension's view of you. Back in 1905, Albert Einstein dropped some pretty cool knowledge on us with his special theory of relativity. He revealed that space and time are all tied together by the speed limit of light. So technically, our universe has 4 dimensions of space-time. But for our everyday lives, we like to keep things simple and think of the universe as having 3 dimensions of space. You know, north, south, east, west, up, down, and 1 dimension of time, which is past and future. Easy peasy. In the 1920s, a couple of genius physicists named Oscar Klein and Theodore Kaluza were like, hey, what if there's a 5th dimension of space? They got this wild idea from Einstein's theory of relativity, which showed that mass can warp space-time. So they wondered, could this extra dimension explain another force called the electromagnetic force? Turns out, it totally could. But here's the catch. The electromagnetic force is way stronger than gravity, like 1,040 times stronger. So for this extra dimension to work its magic, it had to be super tiny. We're talking smaller than an atom, like microscopic small, so small that we wouldn't even notice it. Picture a particle, like an electron, zipping through space and doing loop-de-loops around this 5th dimension, like a little hamster on a wheel. Kaluza and Klein's 5-dimensional theory got hit hard when 2 more fundamental forces were discovered in the atomic nucleus: the strong and weak nuclear forces. But many other scientists who believe in string theory brought back the idea of extra dimensions explaining forces, and it's been about half a century since then. According to this theory, the universe's fundamental building blocks are not particles, but these super tiny strings made of mass energy. These strings do their thing by vibrating in a 10-dimensional space-time, with 6 of those dimensions rolled up way smaller than an atom. String theory suggests that our universe might be like a 3-dimensional island, or a brain just floating around in this massive 10-dimensional space-time. This could explain why gravity is so ridiculously weak compared to the other 3 fundamental forces. The idea is that while the forces are stuck on the brain, gravity sneaks out into those 6 extra space dimensions, making it super diluted on the brain. In 1999, Lisa Randall and Raman Sundram had a mind-bending idea. They suggested that there could be a bigger 5th dimension, all curved in a way that we can't even see. And this extra dimension might solve one of the biggest mysteries of the cosmos: dark matter. You know, that invisible stuff that outweighs all the visible stars and galaxies by 6 times? Yeah, it might just be hiding in that mysterious extra dimension. Portals. Non-existent, but incredibly fascinating phenomena that we see in sci-fi media all the time. We've tried to invent them and understand how they could work from ancient times. But what if portals were more than just a fantasy? What if they were real and could actually be created and controlled? What if we could manipulate the very fabric of space and time itself? If you think about it, this idea raises a lot of paradoxical questions. For example, what happens if we try to carry the portal through itself? Or what if we squeeze and put 2 interconnected portals on top of each other? Well, actually, there are no right answers to these questions. Since portals don't actually exist, we don't know how physics works in them. But we can try to imagine what would have happened and answer these questions from the logical point of view. So let's give it a try. Our first mind-boggling question is, what would happen if we took 2 interconnected portals, like in the Portal game, and passed one of them through the other? Starting with the hard one, huh? Alright, so we have 2 portals, the orange one and the blue one. Everything that gets into the orange portal flies out of the blue one, and vice versa. they're interconnected. If that's the case, then logically, if the blue portal passes through the orange portal, it has to go out of itself. But is it even possible? And what kind of chaos will something like this create? Theoretically, this is possible, but it will be very strange. Since the portals are interconnected, no matter how we turn and move them, the object going through them will always have the same position relative to them. In other words, if we kick the ball into the bottom of the blue portal, it will fly out from the bottom of the orange portal, and so on. Let's note where the top and bottom parts of our portals are so that we don't get too confused. So, what if we try to pass the top of the blue portal through the bottom of the orange one? Then the blue portal will come out of the bottom of itself. It's weird, but that's what should happen logically. And if we keep pushing it further, then the portal will crash into itself, and we won't be able to keep going. But if we try to pass the top of one portal through the top of the other, well, prepare for the complete nonsense. The blue portal will start to come out of itself closer to its top. This protruding part falls back into the orange portal, and the blue portal comes out of its protruding part again. In other words, now we have a portal going out of itself, going out of itself. It's quite difficult to understand and keep track of this. In general, if we want to fully pass the blue portal through the orange one, the very end of the blue portal has to finish coming out of itself, as it simultaneously disappears into the orange portal. But this is impossible unless the portal is infinitely thin. Otherwise, it'll get stuck, or squeezed, or something like that. So even though it's very weird and crazy, this is theoretically possible. The universe is full of surprises, huh? But let's relax our brains a little and move on to the simpler question. What happens if we open the portal in midair, for example, while falling, or underwater? In that case, would the water flow out of the portal to our room? Let's start with a midair one. Imagine that you're falling in the sky and create a portal right in front of you. It leads to your room, and the exit portal is horizontal. What happens then? In this case, you'll fall into the portal at your usual speed, and even after entering your room, you'll fly forward a little by inertia, but after the teleportation, the forces of gravity will immediately affect you. Because of this, you'll begin to fall to the floor as if in an arc. Eventually, you'll just fall face down on the floor. Not the best outcome, but still better than whatever option you had before. Now, to the underwater example. If you opened a portal under the water would definitely flow out on you. It would press down on the portal with all its weight and would flow until it filled all possible space, or until the entire ocean would dry up. This would have a huge impact on the fish. If you opened a portal to the depths of the ocean, where the pressure is huge, and the water would start pouring into a place where the pressure and temperature are completely different, almost all the local marine life could say bye-bye. In other words, if one day we have portals, please don't do it. Now, get your brain in gear for another paradoxical question. What if portals could be stacked, with one leading to another, and so on, creating a chain of connected spaces? Would that be an infinite loop? A never-ending cycle of teleportation? Sounds like a sci-fi dream come true. But is it really that simple? Unfortunately, the answer is no. What happens in this case depends very much on the portals themselves and where they lead. For example, if one portal connected to a space with low gravity and another to a space with high gravity, imagine what that would do to your body. Actually, it's better not to imagine. But that's not all. If we do somehow create a chain of portals, it will lead to great instability or even collapse of these spaces. In short, the consequences will be unpredictable. However, all of these scenarios are just theoretical, as portals are a work of fiction. It's difficult to make a scientifically and logically accurate prediction of what would happen in these situations. The next question is, what if you could teleport into a moving object, like a car or a plane? Sounds scary already, doesn't it? Hold on tight, we're about to break the laws of physics. First, let's talk about momentum. When an object is moving, it's got a certain velocity, and you guessed it, momentum. This means, according to the law of conservation of momentum, the total momentum of a system stays the same unless an outside force comes into play. But what happens when we teleport a person into a moving car or plane? Well, that's a sudden change in the object's mass and therefore its momentum. This change in momentum can cause the car or plane to go haywire, potentially resulting in a crash or, at the very least, a seriously bumpy ride. And let's not forget about the shockwave that comes with suddenly materializing in a moving vehicle. It's safe to say things could get pretty nasty. So again, if we ever get portals, please don't try this at home. And here comes the final question. Let's take one physics mystery and combine it with another. What if you could portal into and out of a black hole? Entering a black hole is incredibly dangerous, to say the least. It may end really badly even for an object traveling at the speed of light. The intense gravitational forces near a black hole can cause objects to be stretched and distorted into some crazy shapes. This is a process known as spaghettification, which is a really scientific term, by the way. And don't forget about the intense gravitational forces which cause the laws of physics as we know them to break down. In other words, your little portal experiment would have some catastrophic effects. In short, you would be spaghettified before you could even say, "Whoops, I shouldn't have done that." So, there you go, folks. The thought experiments about portals are a fun and imaginative way to explore the limits of our current understanding of physics and what could be possible in the future. While the scenarios we discussed are purely hypothetical and not based on any actual science, they still give us a glimpse of fantastical possibilities of the world with portals.
You wake up and can't recognize your room. That's definitely it, but your desk is on the wall, and the dresser is on the ceiling. It's closed, but you can somehow see every folded t-shirt in it. You wipe your eyes. Nothing changes. This isn't a dream. Welcome to the fourth-dimensional world. Wait, rewind. To understand the fourth-dimensional world, we need to look at the others. So, a zero-dimension world is just a point. Now, if you expand it, you get a one-dimensional world that's a simple line. It only has one measure, and that's length. The creatures living in this world can only move in one direction, either left or right. In general, a dimension is a direction in which an object can move. So now we'll add another line perpendicular to the one we have. We get a flat surface with a length and width, like a piece of paper. The flat creatures that live in a 2D world can move left and right, and now forward and backward. To turn this flat paper world into one we're more familiar with, we draw parallel lines from each corner of the square. Now we get height, the third dimension. The objects of this world have three measures: length, width, and height. They can move in three dimensions: left and right, back and forth, up and down. That's the world we live in. But now, we need to figure out where to put the next perpendicular line to get a fourth dimension. It's no easy task, because this fourth dimension, as well as the fifth and 12th ones scientific theories say could exist, are hidden from us because of the limitations of our perception. While we were going through the first three dimensions, we could see that with every next dimension, we expand the possibilities. The objects become more complicated. As inhabitants of a 3D space, we can easily imagine what 1D and 2D worlds are like because they're part of our own. But for residents of those worlds, it's not that easy to understand ours because they're just not able to perceive it. Why? Imagine you're one of these 2D flatlanders and you're living your simple flat life. If a sphere, a 3D object, somehow appears in your world, the only thing you'll be able to see is a dot that appears out of nowhere, and then grows into a longer and longer line, and then shrinks back down into a dot before disappearing. A flatlander could combine all these lines to get a circle. Or, if he could look at it from above, he can't, that would involve height, it would just be a dot growing into a larger and larger circle and then getting smaller. Either way, our flatlander ends up looking at a flat circle, not a sphere. That's exactly what will happen to us if we try to understand a 4D object. We'll see it like a 3D object, appearing, somehow changing, and then disappearing. we wouldn't be able to make sense out of it. For example, let's take a 4D hypersphere and put it in our world. Here's what you'll see. Looks like a regular old sphere appearing, growing, shrinking, and disappearing. Good luck trying to combine the spheres all together to make sense out of its 4D shape. Okay, let's try it with something a little easier. Remember, 1D is a line, 2D is then a square, and 3D adds more perpendicular lines to get a cube. To get a 4D cube, called a tesseract, we connect two cubes. We know that every side of a 3D cube is a square. In a tesseract, every side of it is a cube. This shape looks really confusing, especially if we realize that it's a 3D projection of a 4D object on your 2D screen. Just like the Flatlanders, we're unable to fully understand what a higher dimensional world is like. Even scientists have a vague and limited perception about it. They mostly describe it in complex mathematical equations, not physical objects. But think about it this way. Technically, every single day, 4D or even 10D beings could enter our world, and we wouldn't even know it. Now, if the first, second, and third dimensions are length, left and right, breadth, back and forth, and height, up and down, what does that make the fourth dimension? How about a real-world example? There are 2D ultrasounds that show a flat black and white image, mostly made up of outlines. Then there's 3D. It's basically like a normal photograph you'd see in an album. Things have a form, depth, shadows. Then there's 4D ultrasound. This is an image that's constantly being updated with time. The fourth dimension. Some call it strength, but it's basically space-time, in and out and always. So you wake up in your room in a 4D world. The planet is a hypersphere. Everything around you is as if you lived in a sphere. Your wardrobe is still up on the ceiling, and you need to get dressed. Wait, where are you going? Stay right there. I know you still think the shortest way from A to B is a straight line, but you're in a 4D world now. The shortest way here is through. So just look through your wardrobe, find your favorite t-shirt and jeans, and grab them. That's better. Hey, your roommate is making coffee. Let's grab something to eat too. You could just teleport there, but let's take the long way. No, not the stairs, through the walls and floor. Doors and stairs will probably be non-existent in a 4D world. There's your roommate. Don't be confused, he's okay. Albert Einstein called the 4D universe a space-time world. Here, the past, present, and future all come together. So, like every other object, your friend exists in every moment of his entire life. I know what you're wondering. If you can move through walls, can you move through people too? Yeah, but please don't reach into his head and tickle his brain. That's taboo in this world. Even if it can be done, it shouldn't. Here's another cool thing. You can see people's emotions. See the yellowish shadow around him? It means he isn't in a very good mood. But wait, mentally, you don't need words here. They're too slow. You can reach any person mentally within a moment, even if they're on the other side of the planet. Now, let's grab your sandwich, laptop, some work papers. Oh no, you don't need this bag, forget it. You have pockets, right? Put it all there. You'll see it fits perfectly. There's endless space. Well, and no reason to take things with you when you can instantly teleport. Forgot your wallet? 1 second. Now you have it. Okay, you're a little late already. Work starts at 9 and your boss is going to be seething. But don't worry. Remember, you exist in any time, present, past, and future. Even though it's 9:12 already, just get there by 9. In fact, let's take a vacation day. Teleport to Rome. See all the sights as they were through all of time and history. Master the Italian language. Where to next? When to next? The choice is yours. You can always travel back and get to your job like a punctual hard worker. And still, life in a 4D world would probably be something entirely different than even my wild imagination can come up with. So, I'll let you finish this story down below. You of course know that the Earth is bathed in sunlight every day. Every day we flicker different light sources on and off, mechanically, without even thinking about it. But imagine that one day, you casually flicker the lights off, fall asleep, and wake up in a completely different era. Let's see how it happened and what it has to do with light. Quantum physics is quite crazy. Classical physics is like a movie projected from start to finish, while the quantum world is like having an ability to take the remote control and manipulate scenes you're watching. Fascinating and mysterious. Let's say you have a regular light switch that can be either on or off. That's like a regular bit in computers, which can be in one of two states, 0 or 1. But in quantum computers, there's a special kind of switch, a switch called a qubit. Unlike the regular bits, a qubit can exist in multiple states at the same time. It can be both 0, 1, and all things in between, like having lights on and off simultaneously. Yeah, our universe has some weird rules. This mysterious property, called superposition, allowed us to do something incredible recently, to reverse time back. At least in a tiny experiment with quantum computers. It's the autumn of 2022. Two groups of scientists, one from Oxford and the other from Vienna, decided to conduct a weird experiment. They played around with a quantum computer to create a program that reverses time. They took a tiny electron and tried to make it go backward for a time for just a fraction of a second. It would be like breaking a billiard ball triangle, where the balls go from order to chaos and then magically reverse. But don't get too excited about time travel yet. Unfortunately, we're not sure if it's possible to recreate it in real life. The scientists cracked some numbers and found out that if we observe 10 billion localized electrons every second for the entire age of the universe, we'd only see something like this happen once. And it would only take the electron back a tiny fraction of a second. So they didn't invent a time machine. They just managed to create this simulation in quantum computers. There's another catch too. The larger the simulation, the more complex and less accurate it becomes. In our experiment, we only used one qubit and we managed to reverse time. In a 2-qubit setup, scientists could reverse time only in 85% of cases. And in a 3-qubit setup, it dropped to 50% with more errors. If we keep adding more qubits, we won't be able to pull this off at all. Plus, the success depends on the amount of information the system can store. For example, teleporting a person would be almost impossible because humans have so much information inside them. So, unfortunately, no time machine so far. But there are some possible uses of this discovery. Reversing qubit states in a quantum computer can help correct errors during development, sort of like a little Control-Z in real life. So, it was a tiny step to more exciting discoveries in the future. For example, recently they demonstrated another crazy little thing: send light itself back in time. Now, light isn't mere luminary. It has superpowers that we can't even imagine. The ancient Greeks believed that our eyes emitted visionary beams. Sir Isaac Newton proved them wrong hundreds of years later when he conducted his experiments with prisms. The prism broke the pure white light into a beautiful palette, and that's how we found out that light actually consists of tons of different colors. Many years later, scientists learned even more, that light is a wave. And even later, in the 20th century, we discovered the final paradox, that it's both a wave and a particle, a dual existence in one photon. And the more we learn about light, the more crazy things we find. In 2016, scientists managed to freeze the light in time. They put photons, the tiniest light particles, in ultra-cold atomic clouds. Then they managed to stop it, again, for just a moment. But the fact that it's even possible is already incredible. Then scientists got even bolder. They decided to try not only to freeze the light, but to move its direction in time. They took a special crystal and passed a photon through it, thus initiating the so-called quantum time reversal. As a result, the photon started moving into both the future and past at the same time. The science magic behind this involves two quantum principles: superposition and quantum symmetry. We already mentioned the first one. It allows tiny particles to exist in multiple states at once. Now, the second principle says that even if you flip particles around like a mirror, they'll still follow the same laws. Combining this, scientists crafted a photon that defied the usual forward march of time. But again, it's nothing super fancy yet. This time flip only works for specific particles, not entire humans. And even if it did work for us, rewinding a person even for a second would take a super long time and a lot of energy. But the fact that we can change the light's speed and make it change directions is already amazing, and scientists already see some possible applications to this. For example, Harvard researchers suggest a cool way for spacecraft to zip through space at the speed of light, by hitching a ride on supernovas. Usually, traveling to other stars takes an insane amount of energy, but these scientists have a wild idea. They think that spaceships could use natural events like hypervelocity stars and meteors zooming from supernovas to reach super-fast speeds. It's kind of similar to how sailing ships catch the wind. Advanced civilizations could use these energy bursts to speed up their spacecraft. Imagine a cool spacecraft with solar or magnetic sails harnessing the power of a supernova boom. These sails could use the pressure of the sun's radiation to work, so that we wouldn't need any traditional engines or fuel. Plus, these sails concept are much lighter and cheaper to launch into space compared to regular spacecraft. The team is already working on a light sail accelerated by lasers to reach 20% of the speed of light. It might not sound like a lot, but it's actually an insane speed. Their dream is to help humanity make a swift journey to Alpha Centauri in just 2 decades. Isn't it amazing how many things we can do with light, and not just in our imagination? Let's go to more practical achievements. Recently, a Canadian camouflage company called Hyperstealth Biotechnology Corporation has crafted an actual invisibility cloak. The wizardly cloak doesn't need any power source, is as thin as paper, and won't break the bank. Hyperstealth envisions a world where this material can cloak people, vehicles, ships, spacecraft, and even entire buildings. It's still in a prototype phase, but it already works pretty well. They name this incredible technology quantum stealth. It bends light in a way that can make objects disappear from sight. It can render objects nearly invisible, not only in the visible spectrum, but also in ultraviolet, infrared, shortwave infrared, and it even throws in thermal spectrum blocking for good measure. The technology works thanks to the lenticular lens, a corrugated sheet with outward curving lenses. When stacked in a specific way, these lenses refract light at various angles, creating spots that block light and conceal the object behind the material. Unfortunately, it doesn't give you a full invisibility effect, but maybe someday we'll achieve it, if we keep working on it. If you hide behind it, it will look like a little dirty or blurred glass, but you won't be visible. If you put this veil in front of your body, you'll look like a floating head. Scientific progress is in full swing. Maybe one day we'll be able to reverse time not only for little light particles, but for entire humans. Until then, let's enjoy our invisibility cloaks and stay curious. Okay, so you've seen the movies and read the books on time travel. Most of them tell stories about entering some futuristic boxes, and in the blink of an eye, you're in some different epoch. For now, this is just sci-fi. But there are ways to make time travel possible, at least theoretically. We just don't have the technology figured out yet. For starters, time travel to the future could be achieved by traveling at high speeds, but not just getting a ticket on the superhighway kind of speed. This is based on Einstein's theory of special relativity. It explains that time slows down for objects that move at really high speeds. And the good news is scientists have already tested this theory, and it looks promising. They did it with the help of 2 identical clocks. One was placed on a jet, and one stayed on the ground. They found that the clock on the jet ticked slower than the one on the ground because of how fast the jet was moving. The faster an object is moving, the more time will slow down for it. Currently, the fastest speeds achieved by human technology are seen in a special type of particles called neutrinos. Some of these can move at almost the speed of light. At these speeds, 1 second for the protons is equal to 11 months for us. Now, we might be able to time travel to the future with the use of gravity, too. This idea is based on Einstein's findings, namely his theory of general relativity. Now, this theory explains that the stronger gravity is, the more slowly time moves. This means that as you get closer to the center of the Earth, the strength of gravity increases. And if you think about it like that, time actually passes more slowly for your feet than for your head. Now, is that why I'm always late for stuff? Good excuse. This effect has been measured too, with the help of the same strategy with two identical clocks. Scientists placed them on shelves at different heights and measured the rate of ticking. The clock on the lower shelf ticked more slowly because it experienced a slightly stronger gravity. But this option comes with a catch. To be able to travel to the far future, you'll need to find a place with extremely strong gravity, like a black hole. That's a point in space where the gravity has so much force that even light cannot escape it. There, gravity becomes so intense that matter gets squeezed into a tiny space. The closer you get to the black hole, the more slowly time moves. However, traveling via a black hole is very dangerous, mostly because it's a one-way ticket. Once you cross its edges, there's no coming back. Now, here's a fun fact. The GPS systems we use on our phones and in our cars already have to account for time dilation effects in order to work properly. That's because of the speed of the satellites they use and the gravity they feel here on Earth. Without these corrections, your phone's GPS wouldn't be able to pinpoint your location on Earth very precisely. Meanwhile, the third option has less to do with the universe's unknown forces and more to do with our own bodies. Scientists are trying to find ways to time travel to the future by slowing down the body's own processes. It's not time travel per se. You wouldn't technically be going anywhere. But if your body stays put for a long period of time, you could eventually wake up in the future. Some animals, like bears and squirrels, can slow down their metabolism during hibernation, which means they don't need as much food and oxygen to survive. Specialists are trying to figure out if humans can do the same thing. They're working on ways to make people go into a short-term hibernation for a few hours to begin with. This could be helpful for medical emergencies too, in order to help a person before they can safely get to the hospital. In 2005, scientists were able to slow down the metabolism of mice by exposing them to a small amount of special gas. However, when they tried to do the same thing with larger animals, it did not work as effectively. Our fourth option of traveling through time is really unique. It involves a special type of shortcuts that may exist in our universe called wormholes. Now, before we move on, let's try to understand what they are. You'll need to picture two balls and a trampoline. If there's no pressure applied on the trampoline, it stays flat. Now imagine the two balls placed on the trampoline symmetrically. If you look at them from this perspective, there's no possibility of them ever touching. But if you put enough pressure on the trampoline between the two balls, this flexible fabric can stretch so much that the two objects might potentially touch each other. The same thing happens with stars in different star systems. They're big enough to curve space around them. That's why most planets tend to orbit around a star. The tunnel between those 2 points would be a wormhole. These wormholes could be used to travel long distances, like 1 billion light years, or even visit different times. Now, many scientists, like Stephen Hawking, think that wormholes might appear and disappear, but be very small, smaller than atoms. The problem is that we don't know how to catch one and make it bigger so that people can use it. This would take a lot of energy, and we don't know if it's even possible. Some astronomers say that even if we could find a wormhole and enter it, it would rapidly collapse on itself. Even the tiniest bit of extra mass, like that of our bodies for example, can result in the wormhole slamming shut, like a rubber band that's been stretched too much. Now, the fifth solution for time traveling was proposed by an American physicist named Ron Mallett. It involves one resource that we know for sure is abundant in the universe: light. The scientist proposed a theory about time travel that would use a rotating cylinder of light. He believes that if something was dropped inside this swirling cylinder, it could be moved in both space and time, similar to how a bubble moves when you swirl it with a spoon in your coffee. According to Mallett, the right shape of the cylinder could allow for traveling to both the past and the future. The physicist has been trying to raise money for an experiment to test his theory. This experiment involves dropping tiny particles, called neutrons, through a circular arrangement of spinning lasers. However, other scientists say Mallett's theory is impossible and there's no need to test it further. Well, even if we eventually figured out a way to travel back in the past or to the future, would it be safe? Scientists have been talking about a problem called the paradox of time travel for a long time. The main question is what would happen if you went back in time and did something that changed the future. However, a new study from researchers from the University of Queensland says that this problem might not be real after all. The scientists have done some calculations and found out that even if you had changed something in the past, the timeline would still end up the same way. Another variation of this problem is called the grandfather paradox. Imagine going back in time and preventing your own grandfather from having offspring. Come to think of it, it automatically means you shouldn't exist in the first place. If your grandparents didn't have your parents, how can you exist at all? Well, these days scientists are certain that even if you did experience something like that, you'd still exist in the present. That's because the timeline that already exists has a way of adjusting itself, regardless of where people are in time and what they do. Or somehow get 1.21 gigawatts in a DeLorean and make like Marty McFly.
The Roswell incident is a collection of events and myths surrounding the crash of a mysterious object in 1947. Right after rubber and metallic debris was recovered by Roswell Army Airfield staff, the United States Army claimed that they had their hands on a flying disc. Just a day after this announcement was made and made international headlines, it was retracted, but the word was already out. To hide the true nature of the find, the Army stated it was a good old weather balloon. But later in 1978, a retired Air Force officer revealed that it was just a cover story. At the same time, he added that he was sure that the debris had an extraterrestrial origin. This speculation became popular thanks to the 1980 book, The Roswell Incident. It also turned into the basis for long-lasting and increasingly contradictory and complex UFO conspiracy theories. Over time, they expanded the incident to include authorities hiding the evidence of other space civilizations, multiple crashed flying saucers, alien bodies, and even reverse engineering of extraterrestrial technology. However, none of those theories were based on any real evidence. But despite the absence of proof, many supporters of the UFO theory claimed that the Roswell debris was from a crashed alien craft. They accused the authorities of creating cover-up stories. This conspiracy narrative became a trope in movies, science fiction literature, and TV shows. No wonder that the town of Roswell is still promoting itself as the best destination for UFO-associated tourism. But what happened in this area in reality? The government's claim that a weather balloon had crashed at Roswell was indeed a lie. In 1994, the Air Force admitted that the recovered debris had actually been from an American balloon used to watch other nations. It was part of Project Mogul, an attempt to monitor anticipated nuclear tests that could be conducted by other countries. In 1997, an Air Force report called the Roswell Report, Case Closed, suggested that all those stories about alien bodies could have come from civilian witnesses who had seen parachute crash test dummies. The report also suggested that the witnesses might have combined several different events in their memories: the Project Mogul materials, the crash of test dummies, and a few other accidents that had occurred in the area. For many supporters of the UFO theory, though, those explanations sounded like the authorities planned to cover up their interaction with extraterrestrial civilizations. After all, in 1947, the USA, as well as some other nations, was in the midst of the flying saucer craze. People reported seeing bizarre objects in the sky. They claimed those were spacecraft piloted by aliens. It was against such a hectic background that a rancher discovered some highly unusual debris near Roswell, New Mexico. The material included tinfoil, sticks, and rubber strips. The next month, he took his findings to the Roswell sheriff. The man contacted the Roswell Army Airfield. After getting the wreckage, they issued that very extraordinary press release claiming that a flying disc had been found at a local ranch. The reasons for such an outrageous statement were unclear. In any case, the Roswell Daily Record picked up this press release right away, printing the story on the 8th of July with the headline, "RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region." That's when the military backtracked, announcing that it had been just a weather balloon carrying a radar target. That's a device that looks like a box kite made of foiled paper fastened to a balsa wood frame. The Roswell Morning Dispatch paid attention to this new claim and released a new story called "Army Debunks Roswell Flying Disc as World Simmers with Excitement."
In the middle of the previous century, flying saucers were constantly making headlines. America was going through a surge of reported UFO sightings. So it shouldn't probably come as a surprise that the American authorities, namely the US Air Force, created a couple of short-lived programs. Those were Project Sign and Project Grudge, and their main goal was to look into that phenomenon. These programs were followed by likely the most famous of them all, Project Blue Book. It was a large-scale government study that lasted from 1951 to 1969. The initiator of this program was Major General Charles P. Cabell. He was a former intelligence director of the Air Force. Project Blue Book scrupulously gathered over 12,600 reports about people seeing bizarre, unidentified objects in the sky. After thorough research, it was determined that most of those had natural, quite mundane explanations. As for the rest of the reports, the members of Project Blue Book simply didn't have enough data to evaluate them. That's why support for their efforts dwindled. Officially, Project Blue Book was closed in December 1969. But apparently, it didn't make American authorities lose interest in UFO sightings. Because in mid-December 2017, the world found out that they had secretly launched one more UFO research program in the late 2000s. Accordingly to certain documents, American authorities spent around $22 million over a 4-year span on a project called the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program, aka AATIP. This project was started in 2007, and its main goal was to study UFO phenomena. Most likely, all this activity was triggered by the 2004 Tic Tac incident. That's when a few US Air Force pilots spotted unidentified flying objects off the coast of California. They captured them on video. None of the pilots could figure out what these objects were. They behaved in a weird way, as if our laws of physics didn't apply to them. They were reportedly flying extremely fast and rotating in unpredictable movements. It looks as if after that incident, American authorities decided to investigate whether those objects could be identified or not. And if not, they were eager to know where they had come from and if they had been a threat. When the New York Times story about the new project broke, officials announced that the study had been terminated in 2012. However, there were people who claimed that the program was still ongoing. One of those was a military intelligence official running the program until they quit in October 2016. In any case, let's have a closer look at this mysterious program. Indeed, the areas of research funded by the project resembled things you could find in Star Trek. For example, one grant was for the study of traversable wormholes, stargates, and negative energy. This study was conducted by Eric W. Davis of EarthTech International, Inc. Another grant sponsored the research of invisibility cloaking. One more area of study included warp drive, dark energy, and the manipulation of extra dimensions. This research was conducted by a theoretical physicist and director of the nonprofit Icarus Interstellar. As we've already mentioned, all these studies received at least $22 million of funding, but this sum could have been much bigger. No one has revealed why or how these studies were given such huge grants under the AATI program. The results of the study aren't known publicly either. The criteria for choosing these fields of research could be that warp drives and stargates might be useful for extraterrestrial civilizations traveling interstellar distances to visit our planet. Still, some people are not amused that such questionable fields of study were receiving substantial government funding.
It was the year 1952 when America first caught the flying saucer fever. A rash of strange sightings was reported in the skies over Washington, D.C. Were those unexplained radar blips, unidentified aircraft, or something much more outlandish? The Washington, D.C. sightings of the summer 1952 are also known as the Big Flap. But it all started in 1947 when a search and rescue pilot reported 9 saucer-like things flying like geese in a diagonal chain-like line.
Their speed reportedly exceeded 1,000 miles per hour. Within mere weeks, the sightings of flying saucers were reported in 40 other states. Later, the explanations were found. The sightings were either hoaxes or misidentifications of known aircraft and natural phenomena, but a few cases remained unexplained. By 1952, the UFO investigation unit called Project Blue Book had been founded. It was led by Captain Edward Rubbold. He and his team would have continued to investigate a few dozen sightings per month, but for the April 1952 issue of Life magazine, with an eye-catching headline, "There is a case for interplanetary saucers." The article made quite a convincing case. It spoke about 10 unexplained UFO incidents, claiming that the flying objects were extraterrestrial in origin. According to the Washington Post, after the appearance of the article, the number of UFO sightings grew more than sixfold, from 23 in March 1952 to 148 in June. By July, the UFO mania was in full swing. All that was missing was a spark. And it happened before midnight on Saturday, July 19th, 1952. An air traffic controller at Washington National Airport spotted 7 slow-moving objects on his radar screen. They were far from any civilian or military flight paths. He called his supervisor and joked about a fleet of flying saucers. Simultaneously, 2 other air traffic controllers at National spotted a bizarre bright light hovering in the distance. It suddenly dashed away at breakneck speed. At Andrews Air Force Base, located nearby, radar operators detected the same unidentified blips. Those were slow and clustered at first, but then they raced away at a speed higher than 7,000 miles per hour. One Andrews controller looked out of his tower window and spotted something he later described as an orange ball of fire with a tail. A commercial pilot flying over the Virginia and Washington, D.C. area saw 6 streaking bright lights resembling falling stars without tails. 2 jets were sent to search for the UFOs, but every time they got close to the locations shown on the radar screens, the weird blips would disappear. By dawn of July 20th, the objects were gone altogether. Ruppelt, the lead investigator of Project Blue Book, found out about the sightings just a few days later after flying to Washington, D.C. and reading news reports. He tried to get to National and Andrews to interview the radar operators and air traffic controllers, but wasn't allowed to take a government-issued car. He had to fly back to Ohio with nothing. In a few days, UFOs were back over the Capitol. The same radar blips appeared again. Radar operators were wondering whether those dozen or so objects could be caused by a temperature inversion. That's a common occurrence in DC's muggy, scorching summer months. It occurs when a layer of warm air forms in the low atmosphere. It traps cooler air beneath. In this case, radar signals can bounce off the layer at shallow angles and create an impression of near-ground objects in the sky. To be safe, 2 more aircraft were sent to chase down the unidentified targets. The jets raced to a location targeted by radar, only for the blips to disappear. Eventually, one of the plane pilots saw a bright light in the distance and gave chase. But even though he was flying at maximum speed, he didn't manage to overtake the lights. At a press conference, representatives of the Air Force offered the public some easy-to-swallow explanations, having opted for the temperature inversion theory. After that, UFO sightings dropped from 50 a day to 10.
One of the best and most convincing pieces of evidence that extraterrestrial civilizations have visited Earth could be the epic Nuremberg space battle of April the 4th, 1561. It was recorded either in 1561 or 1566. Different sources provide different information. All the retellings of this story focus on the woodcut picture and a vague summary of events that occurred that day. The emphasis is always on crashed spaceships and space battles. Almost everywhere you read or hear the story, it goes like this. The inhabitants of the city woke up early on an April morning and saw a staggering celestial show that looked like a real space battle. This story sounds even more convincing when you find out that some objects allegedly fought for quite a while. And some even crashed. You can see them in the lower right corner. Look at the picture once again. Orbs and crosses fighting, a giant arrow and bizarre tubes, crashing ships. Wow, that had to be a spectacular cosmic battle. To make it all more plausible, Hans Glaser, the artist behind the woodcut, was a very real person. He really did woodcuts, and this one is indeed from the time and place that it says it is, meaning it's not fake, and it does depict a real event that had its own witnesses. For all intents and purposes, it looks like very convincing proof of aliens visiting us, but don't get your hopes up. A superficial perusal of facts seems to confirm an extraterrestrial presence on our planet. But the most likely explanation is much more mundane. The Nuremberg 1561 UFO battle is just an atmospheric phenomenon called a sundog, or parhelion. A sundog is a concentrated spot of sunlight that can sometimes be seen to the right or to the left of the sun, or even on its both sides simultaneously. Sundogs often appear as a pair of patches of light with subtle colors at the same altitude over the horizon as the sun. They can have a variety of forms, from colorful spots to patches of light so intense and bright, it looks like there are 2 additional suns in the sky. Sundogs are weird looking enough to make it seem that something scary and otherworldly is going on in the sky. At the same time, it's just our planet's atmosphere or ice in the upper parts of the sky acting as a prism or reflective device. This prism makes the light from the sun or moon do weird things. This image can help you visualize the phenomenon. Apparently, Nuremberg had the perfect conditions for this phenomenon to occur. If you examine the depiction of this event and compare it with modern pictures and videos, you'll soon realize that a sundog is indeed a more likely explanation than the Galactic Empire paying us a visit. Let's find the proof of this statement in the translated description of these events and in the woodcut picture itself. First, the sun showed and was seen with 2 blood-colored half-round strokes, like the diminishing moon right through the sun, and in the sun, above, under, and on both sides, stood blood-colored and partly bluish, or iron-colored, also black-colored round orbs. Now here's the photo of a sundog. It has a halo surrounding it, and a red orb. And if we have at least 1 red orb, there could be others showing up during other events. Plus, keep in mind that sundogs are like prisms. So, depending on how light is reflected, there could be multiple colors present during such a phenomenon. Now, referring to circled plates mentioned in the description, those could be halos. For example, this sun halo looks vaguely plate-like, and it seems to be linked to other sun halos. And indeed, people have seen halos with multiple orbs. Some of the orbs could have taken a cross-like shape. If we watch some modern videos of sundogs, we might notice that the orbs on film are sun-colored. But since the Nuremberg event happened between 4 and 5 a.m., the clouds and the sun could have had reddish and orange hues. As for the fighting, it could be as simple as one shape moving a bit and changing shape along with the movements of the sun. It could have looked as if it was pushing the other shapes out of the way. Do you agree with the scientific explanation? Or do you prefer to think that Earth was visited by guests from a galaxy far, far away? Write your opinion in the comments.
According to the theory of panspermia, life could have been brought to Earth by a meteorite, comet, or asteroid from a different region of space. At the moment, this idea remains purely theoretical. But let's figure out if it could actually turn out to be true. Traditionally, exobiologists, those who are focused on searching for life outside Earth, have been trying to explore the possibility of life on Mars or in the subsurface oceans of Saturn's and Jupiter's icy moons. But simple life could be much more widespread. It could be drifting through interplanetary space right now, in the form of dormant bacteria and spores. Several scientists have noted that the ultra-harsh environment of space is likely to severely damage the DNA and RNA of such spores and microorganisms. Others believe that since enough microbes could be traveling in a dust cloud, some of them could survive in their original form. There are several types of panspermia. For example, lithopanspermia proposes that some kind of microbic life could exist in debris blasted into the cosmos after planetary collisions with comets and asteroids. Radiopanspermia claims that organisms might be able to travel through space with the help of radiation coming from stars. But in this case, it's unclear how the effect of dangerous ultraviolet and X-ray radiation, combined with the vacuum of space, doesn't totally destroy microorganisms. There's also pseudopanspermia. According to it, organic building blocks of life appear in interstellar clouds of dust. They get transported to the surfaces of planets, and life starts developing there. It sounds really fascinating, but is there any evidence for the panspermia theory? Well, there have been a few orbital experiments. For example, from 2008 to 2016, the samples gathered by EXPOSE, special equipment mounted outside the International Space Station and dedicated to astrobiology, were exposed to the conditions of space. After that, they were returned to Earth from the ISS. It turned out that some of them had survived those severe conditions. There was even a case when 100% of bacterial spores placed in Mars-like conditions were still capable of life. Also, some seeds survived and were later grown as plants on Earth. There have also been exostack experiments on the U.S. Long-Duration Exposure Facility satellite and biopan experiments on Russian photon capsules. They have shown that with minimal protection, spores, lichens, and even minuscule animals, such as tardigrades, might be able to survive in space for as long as several years. A piece of Surveyor 3 lunar lander was brought back to Earth in 1969 by the Apollo 12 mission. Shockingly, it contained an Earth bacterium that had survived unprotected for more than 2 years on the airless surface. At the same time, this bacterium could have come from laboratory contamination on arrival back on Earth. The Indian Space Research Organization carried out a search for space microorganisms too. It was done at stratospheric altitudes via balloon flights. The results showed that living interplanetary cells existed in air samples taken from heights of above 25 miles. Normally, air from lower levels of the atmosphere can't be transported there, so this discovery seemed to prove the theory of panspermia. But in 2010, NASA atmospheric sampling before and after hurricanes proved that under certain circumstances, Earth bacteria could actually be transported very high into the upper levels of the atmosphere. One of the main arguments against panspermia is that if this theory was correct, all life found throughout the solar system would have a common origin and share main biochemical characteristics like genetic code. It doesn't sound plausible. Many specialists believe that only the presence of astronaut explorers on the surfaces of, let's say, Mars, Europa, or Enceladus can properly solve the question of life in the solar system. They can compare any life forms found with Earth-type life, which can turn out to be a real test of panspermia. In any case, until probes finally find direct proof of spaceborne life, the panspermia theory will remain unproven.